Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Bid Breakfast. Morning, Rob.
Good morning.
Shall we address what happened last night?
Yeah, I had a terrible night's sleep. Is that what you're referring to? Mosquitoes.
Yeah. Well, there were definitely some annoying creatures around last night in the shape of the Argentinian football team. So, hopefully everyone's got over that now and is ready for the Euros.
Hey, don't forget, third place playoff.
Yeah. Let's move on. So today is about working in partnership.
Like the England football team.
Well, do you know what? I was thinking about whether there was an analogy there, but since it's still raw and painful, I think we should just ignore that for today.
Okay.
So this is quite an interesting one of when you first know that you need somebody else to bid, and some of the bids we've worked on, we've experienced this at different stages. Most of the time, it's been pre-bid or at the very start of the bid, but there have certainly been occasions, as it says there on the last bullet point, halfway through the bid. But let's assume that there is some level of planning to this. Pipeline is probably the first point where there might be a flag raised to say we potentially can't do this on our own and we need someone else to do it. So in an ideal world, that's where we want to be identifying this. And for those people that don't have pipelines, it's not that complicated to create one. So if you don't have one, it probably takes half an hour a week just to keep it updated once it's there. Based on that, you will then be able to work out if you can just do things on your own or you need somebody. The next phase then might be any pre-bid work or pre-bid assessment that you go through. And there are some companies we work with who do have a very rigorous assessment process, pre-bid and throughout the bid, of whether they can win. Obviously, that would follow pipeline. And again, there's probably some of the smaller companies we work with who maybe don't have that in place.
Yeah.
The other option is market engagement. I think this is a really good one where even if it's on Teams these days, you can quite often see who else is in the room, and you potentially are looking at people that would enhance your bid. And often there is a partnership register that is provided as part of a bid that you can identify potential partners. The other might be on release of the bid pack where something's changed. So all of this pre-bid works great, but then all of a sudden they've added an extra component to the bid or an extra product, and you can't actually tender for that in its entirety. So I think there are definitely a whole number of checkpoints when the flag might go up. And what we really don't want is that last one, which is halfway through the bid, because then it makes life very difficult.
Just thinking about the pipeline, and often when you're doing the pipeline, you're just thinking about, well, what services are there out there that we can deliver as we are? Mm-hmm. So if you do think about partnership, consortium, or whatever, subcontracting, or being a subcontractor, that may put a different slant on your pipeline as well, because there's probably plenty of opportunities out there where you can do some of it, but you can't do all of it. And obviously we'll get to some of that down the line, but just think about that with your pipeline work and your pre-bid work. There may be avenues in areas that you hadn't previously looked at before.
Yeah. And this is the bit that is really helpful when you get into do we need a partner, and that's the reasons for working with somebody else. Because in all honesty, it's often more difficult to work with somebody than it is to bid alone. So there has to be a very, very good reason to be taking somebody else into your bid. First and foremost, it will largely be around improving and enhancing your capability. So there's a number of people that we work with that generally do most things themselves, but there will be often a specialist element that they need to subcontract or work in partnership with. or simply they might just be too small and they're very focused on one element and want to bid for a wider piece of work. The other, which we often see, is enhancing your experience. And that's, when we say experience, what we're really talking about is the kind of evidence that you would put in a bid. So case studies, data, testimonials, track record. It's all those things that make you credible as a bidder. Now those first two generally are in the sort of ITT phase, if we just want to use that term broadly. But passing the SQ is before that, and that's actually really important because often those things are pass fail. So if it's a financial threshold, you might need specific accreditations or qualifications. If you don't have them, you simply fail and things go no further. So that's very black and white in most cases where actually we do need someone to pass this. The next one might be to increase or create delivery infrastructure. And this might be if you're a smaller local business and you're bidding for something national and you just need the greater reach. Or it might just be that you want to, it might be logistics and you need more depots. It might be products and you might need more manufacturing. The other really important one is local connections. So particularly around social value and the amount of times that we've written about local businesses, local supply chain, local employment, very, very helpful in terms of social value, but also it helps you to understand the area. So particularly when we think about some of the health and social care bids that we do, neighbourhoods, understanding what's happening in a specific area is very, very helpful. And of course, particularly with the health and social care, if there are groups of people that don't generally engage, then having that local connection is often very helpful. It might also be a requirement of the bid or proposal. We have seen this only a few times over the years where it's very clear that there should be a consortium or partnership or lead with subcontractors. And then ultimately, it's to win. So that's always the bottom line with all of this stuff. Why are we bidding? And it's to win. Whether it's at all costs is up for debate. You might have a view on that.
Or the biggest one for me, or some of these are fairly obvious, but I think that local connections one has a lot of facets to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can purely be politics. So a council has a particular flavour of politics, and that might mean that they're more interested in using local suppliers, or there might be an environmental slant. It could be anything, but that comes from your pre-bid as well. If you know that, then you can target the right people to work with. Often if you can have a VCSE as part of your wider group, even if that's just subcontracting a little bit of it, or potentially a partnership bid, that's almost always going to go down very well with the locals, as long as they can enhance your delivery as well. So there is a little bit of an element to that, but generally there's going to be a positive element to that, particularly in health and social care, but also in some other sectors as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, then let's have a look at who could we work with. And this is where things often get a little bit tricky of, we've got a gap to fill, we don't know anybody. And that's when you've really got to start going through your phone book, and current relationships and networks are always the first place to start for most people. And that would be, who do we know? Can we give them a ring, drop them? I would say for stuff like this, mostly it needs to be a conversation. Intro email is great, but this really needs to be a conversation. There's also current supply chain, and particularly that's helpful if it is a lead bidder with subcontractors, and there's all sorts of different options that you could use for that. Other things might be known competition, so there might be a whole bunch of competitors that you've got. Now this is an interesting one because there have been bids where competitors have formed partnerships to make sure that they get the work and don't compete against each other necessarily, and not in a way that is illegal,
I was
But
going to say,
yeah,
market collusion.
yeah, yeah, and that is a very real risk that you have to protect against. Obviously,
It'll
is
be a
that
bit
it's
of a
not.
stitch up.
Yeah, yeah. So there has to be a valid, and of course, by doing that, there's all sorts of issues that we'll get onto in terms of margin and whatever. But it is, I wouldn't say common, but certainly we've seen it a few times over the years where all of the parties need to win, and they would rather have a piece of the pie than all of the pie. And by coming together, they form a very strong group. And often you'll see those companies and people at market engagement events, and I think that is a great way to identify who potentially you might want to work with. The first thing is, if they're at the market engagement event, they're probably interested in the opportunity, which is a great start. And from there, then it's really about what they do, and again, back to what gap do they fill. And of course, you've got a captive audience on the day, so it's quite easy to run around the room or even just to see who's on Teams and then get an idea of what potentially you might do with them. We mentioned before that quite often within a bid, there's a partnership register, and we've just had one of those recently, which was actually very helpful in terms of identifying a partner. So I think those again are very helpful mechanisms of finding somebody to fill a gap. Market research. Now, this is one where probably people don't have time to do, and we see this regularly where it comes too late in the day. So, you know, when you're just talking about pipeline, Rob, and when you might pick things up, it's essentially that's the time to be doing all this stuff. Social media as well. I mean, the amount of posts that I see on LinkedIn or Instagram of businesses that are interesting, and there does seem to be quite a lot of business. I would say like advert type stuff on Instagram, which is interesting to understand who's out there in the market. And of course, there might be people that your bid consultancy know and can connect you with, which we've done for people in the past.
There's also, dare I say, just plugging us a little bit more, is that we probably have more dedicated time we can put to that than some, particularly SMEs, will be able to take, just from our experience.
Yeah, and I think this for me is the bit where it sort of gets a little bit difficult in identifying who we could work with, because essentially, I mean, this is basically dating for companies, isn't it? You're trying to find somebody to have a relationship with in a professional sense, and that is quite difficult. So, you know, it might not be the first company that you go to that it works out with, but obviously there's a very short time window to be able to do this. So this is the bit where it does get very difficult in terms of finding that ideal partner.
And that's why we have to go back, keep banging the drum about pipeline and pre-bid, because having to do this in a 4-week window, what's the old analogy we use, Matt, is building the plane whilst trying to fly it.
Yeah, and that's bad enough without having to load in trying to form a partnership or consortium or and this is the bit where it does kind of come back to that sort of scenario of almost kind of dating, is how do we select the right organization. And it, you know, there's always going to be a long list, hopefully, and there isn't just one company that you can go, well, it's just them, because then it's much more difficult in terms of negotiation. They may very well just be on the same page, but often there'll be things that they want that you don't want. So ideally, we're starting off with a long list, and that will have been formed from all the things that we've talked about, so partnership events, partnership registers, market research, all that stuff. And then we're going to get into a due diligence phase. And this is really the bit where we want to, on paper, understand if these are people we want to have a professional relationship with. So that might be, we might be looking at accounts, we might be looking at other stuff on Companies House, we might be looking at board papers, we might be looking at various other things that are in the public domain. We might be looking on Find a Tender to see how many contracts they've got. It's all sorts of information that we can pick up. That then will get us down to a short list. and ideally we probably want 1 to 3 companies on that shortlist. Then we're into how do we select the first one of those, let's say it is 3, the first one of those 3 to approach. And I always think with stuff like this, values and working practice are probably one of the things that really help when it comes to delivery. It's not necessarily essential in setting up a partnership, because whilst that's quite helpful, there are other things that probably need to be considered more. The values and working practice really help if you win and have to deliver and work together, and that's where that really becomes important. But I've seen so many partnerships fall apart because these things weren't aligned. The other things might be how well they fill that gap. So it might be they absolutely fill it 100%, they're the best in the market at what they do, and there's nobody else that's better. And if they know that, then there's probably a more difficult negotiation there. But essentially, that's why we're going down this route, it's because there was a gap that needs to be filled, and we need to find someone that can do it well. And also, it needs to be aligned with your customer's perception as well. So what we don't want is the customer to be sat at the other end reading the tender going, why on earth have they picked these guys, or we know these guys and we don't like them? And I think that whilst that's never going to be scored or marked, it is a very important thing.
Definitely. And that comes back to the due diligence as well, doesn't it? So you should be able to figure that out. Has that organisation done work in that area before? Even just a cursory glance at some news stories may pop some stuff up, positive or negative.
Yeah. Okay. So once we've picked who it is that we want to work with, we've been through all of those initial conversations. We then need to get into the formalities of what this is going to look like. So generally speaking, there's going to be an NDA just to protect everybody for that opportunity and potentially wider opportunities. There may well be heads of terms. There may well be an MOU. And all of these things are really important in terms of helping people to understand what the partnership or consortium or joint venture is going to look like. And it's really helpful to get that down on paper, because where things aren't clear, that's when things go wrong in the future. So it will be, oh, we didn't know you wanted us to do this, so we've done that, and then you've got a big problem to sort out. So whatever it is that needs to be put down on paper and agreed and signed, that would always be the first step in this process. So it might be a subcontract, it might be something else. Whatever it is, make sure that what you're looking for is very, very clearly explained and signed at the right level within the partners or partner organisation. Then, so whether it's a subcontract or whatever that contract type might be, make sure that that is in place and everyone is on the same page on that. It may well be that there is the creation of a new entity that's required, and that gets very complicated at that stage. And if you are trying to do that within a bid window, then we are really trying to build and fly planes. I thought you were going to say something then, Rob.
Oh, no, sorry. I've been there, done that, and got a T-shirt that I immediately burned after the situation.
In the plane as it went down.
It was so traumatic, but they won, but God knows how. Anyway.
Yeah. And that if you are creating a new entity, it can be done, but it is very, very stressful trying to get all of that done at the same time. Governance arrangements, again, very, very important that both or more than, if it's more than one partner, all organisations really understand how governance will work, first of all, inside their own organisation, and then more importantly, how those organisations feed into a partnership board or whatever it is that sits at the top. And as with all governance arrangements, that should be a flow that goes both ways. So it should come from the partnership into the organisations and the organisations into the partnership. We've already sort of touched on this quite a lot, but the roles of partners. And Where people don't define this because, it's obvious what they're going to do and it's obvious what we're going to do, there is often a lot of creep within a project or the delivery of the service. And that's, again, what causes problems is, well, you didn't say we couldn't do this, and then you've got a big argument to have. So being very, very clear on what the role of each partner is really important. Payment arrangements, and this is often where things go wrong because everyone argues over money. So what the arrangements will be. So clearly what the amount is, and it might be that there's a core amount and there might be some performance incentives, there might be rebates, there might be whatever. The frequency of payment, how it's going to work. That is one of the key areas to make sure you've got absolutely nailed down, because that's where things will go wrong. And understandably, if like a partner's got 30 staff to pay and they had assumed they were being paid monthly and it's quarterly or whatever the arrangement might be, that then puts a lot of stress on people. And I've seen some really big bust-ups over money because there was a misunderstanding. The other one, which came back to me as we were putting these slides together, and I think this is a really important one, but it's often overlooked, and I didn't know about it until we did some work with a construction firm years ago. And the guy that I worked with closely at their end was very into partnership working. And he said, there's an ISA for this. And I said, really? He said, yeah, there's a proper ISA.
It's an ISA for anything.
Well, yeah. But there's also a whole load of other stuff around partnerships and how you should put them together in a more formal way. And it's a very structured process that I've been through a couple of times with him working on bids. And the one thing that I really liked with that structured approach, which I hadn't seen anywhere else, was within that approach, you plan for exit. And that's often something that nobody does with a partnership. We need a partner, we need it for this bid, we've got to get it done, we sign all the papers, that's it, we put the bid in, win the bid, straight into delivery. Then you finish the contract after a couple of years or 3 years, whatever it might be, and then everyone sits there going, right, what do we do now? How do we bring this partnership to a close? And often where it gets sticky is there's assets to divide, or there's money left over, or there's staff to deal with. And planning for exit at the start is one of the biggest eye-openers I've ever seen within partnerships and how to form them. And this is where, you've delivered a great service for 3 years, you've worked really well together, it should be a marriage made in heaven, and all of a sudden it falls apart at that stage, and then you never talk to each other again. So that, for me, if there's one takeaway, like from me, this is it. Just plan for exit at the start and how it's going to happen. Are you going to have, you're going to get everyone together in the same room and have a big sort of exit meeting, because there'll be all sorts of uncertainty, particularly if the staff involved. Are you going to go straight into another bid? Are you going to do whatever the arrangements are? All of that ideally wants to be planned out. Right then, Rob, do you want to run through?
Yes. Well, we kind of covered off a lot of this already, haven't we? I mean, the poor due diligence is a very obvious one. The key thing, reputation locally is a big one. Check their performance if you can. Try and get some evidence of that. Financials is a huge one. You must do the due diligence on the finances. This goes multiple ways. If you are being a subcontractor to a wider organization, you want to know their financial situation is in a good place. You don't want them collapsing and then suddenly you're screwed, essentially. The other way around is you don't want your subcontractor to suddenly go bust for whatever reason, and then you're left with a big hole in your service and probably an explanation to the end client as to why you haven't got that person you said you would in the bid. Not really used to working in partnership. That's another big one. I've worked with plenty of organisations that don't like to play ball with anyone else, and they don't have the culture or systems set up to do that. I think in construction and FM, I think that's a bit of an exception. I think they often do because that's the way those industries work. But in healthcare, even where everything's meant to be integrated and holistic and lovely, it's amazing how many organisations and even NHS trusts do not like playing with anyone else. if you've created something just for the bid, there can be issues. You're not aligned with values or your operating model. You're doing it just to try and win it. But that will cause you issues just in the bid itself. I don't think the writing will come across very well. But also, if you win it, delivery is not going to be much fun for everyone involved if you haven't got those things aligned. Obviously, there's a chance that a partner can withdraw in the bid process, and that can happen at any time. I've had that happen in the final few days because the finances fell through. So consider having a backup plan if possible. Although having a partner as second best or second choice doesn't necessarily come across very well either. More difficult bid production. I mean, crikey. Everything Matt said about how you should do things around communication and agreements, you've got to put something in for the actual bid production as well. Who's leading the bid? How are subcontractors or partners feeding into the process? Who's signing things off? Where's the information coming from? How much do you trust the people in charge of the bid? We've worked on projects where with, I think it might have been 2 weeks to go, one of the major partners who weren't leading the bid production process finally saw the drafts and they were not happy at all. And there was a quick cleanup to try and deal with that. But nobody had ever defined the bid production process in the first place, so it made it doubly difficult. Yet power dynamics, obviously, that kind of goes back to a bit of the values element as well. You've got to be really clear on who's doing what, who's leading, and whether you are comfortable being a follower or whether it is a true partnership with people actually having ideas and discussion in amongst it. Often, if you're a subcontractor, you don't necessarily get the luxury of feeding into it properly. You're just told to do your bit of it. Whether that's a healthy partnership model is another matter. Unfair terms and conditions. Matt's kind of touched on this already. Get legal advice, I would suggest, especially if you are the partner with less power in the partnership. And obviously, the protection of your current business that Matt's talked about, the competition element before as well, win at all costs. You've got to remember why you're doing this, okay? And the Tour de France is on at the moment, and I've been saving up this analogy for a bit. At the end of a race, just bear with me, you might get 5 riders at the front, all from different teams. One rides off into the distance, and the other 4 go, do you want to work together, or are you chasing down? But that means any of us could win it. Or you could just let them ride off into the distance because you couldn't be bothered to work together. It's a bit of that with partnership working sometimes as well. Are you prepared to give away maybe a bit of a slice of the pie to win the bid?
Fantastic analogy, Rob.
Thank you.
I'm sure we were going to put some pros in there, but obviously we just decided.
Well, we did. The whole pro of it is: do you want to win the bid? If you do it right, that's what it is.
Yeah. I think there's just a couple of points before we finish today, and one is a very painful lesson if you've ever been through this. Is if things change within a partnership, whether that is you replace a subcontractor or partner, or you are bought out, or whatever that might be, and things change, more often than not, you are required to tell the customer that what has happened. And we've seen instances of this where most of the time people go, oh, well, we sort of saw it in the press, or you should have told us, that's a bit naughty. But we've also seen instances where customers have really gone to town on, it says in the contract, if you don't tell us, we can cancel all your contracts. And we've seen that happen in the real world, and it's not a very pleasant place to be. So always check what is in your contract around partnerships and notifying the customer of changes. The other, and I think this is probably the most important one, Rob, when you were talking about culture. I was working for an NHS trust years ago, and it was a large trust. And I remember being sat in a room with a partner organisation who was a charity, having a conversation that could not have been more difficult. And it all came down to money And basically, it was that power dynamics point there, which was, we're in charge, you do as you're told. And both sides couldn't work without the other. And it got very, very difficult, to the point where there had to be a very cleverly managed side conversation between the two senior people to try and find some resolution. But again, it was a massive contract that they'd won. You know, it was millions and millions of pounds, and they were arguing over pointless stuff because the culture wasn't right, and that really soured what would have been a great relationship.
It's always the people that don't have to write the bid either. I mean, just purely from a bid writer's perspective, all these arguments taking place, and often you can't do anything as the writer until all those are sorted out, and by that time you've got 3 days left to do it. That's a bit to an extreme level.
Yeah. Right. I think that's pretty much all we've got to say on partnerships for today. We've obviously got a lot more to say if anybody wants to pick our brains on that. The one interesting opportunity for today is my fascination with catering services for this year. So this is an enormous framework. So it's CPC, outsourced catering. This is 3 or 4 frameworks within the series. It's 26 lots across England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, with a maximum of 416 suppliers being appointed across those lots. It is an enormous contract value of 1.8 billion. It's potentially up to 8 years with extensions. That is due to be submitted on the 11th of August. So there is a reasonable amount of time to get that done. If anybody wants any help with that, give us a shout. And that brings us to the end of today. Our next one will be in 2 weeks' time on the 30th of July. So we will see everybody then.
Thank you.